our people now, do you feel like most Black Christians, fundamentalists, are under a spell right now? What are your thoughts on that?
A lot are, and it's scary, uh, especially this segment of Black Christianity
Yeah.
that sees pro-Blackness as some form of idolatry. That's like the most concerning part. And I say that because it's not everybody. Like, I know some of the most pro-Black Christians, like pro-Black people who are Christians. Like, that's a real thing. But like these people who think that if you identify with Jesus having dark skin like a Black man, that somehow that makes your skin color an idol. And I just wish we would come from under the spell of self-loathing. And I love what Ibram X. Kendi said. The only thing wrong with Black people is that we think something is wrong with Black people. That's the only thing wrong with us, is that we think something is wrong with us. We think something is wrong with being Black.
Yeah.
And if we could come from under that spell, man, we would be unstoppable.
Yeah.
But there's a large portion of Black Christianity that is fully tied into a theology of anti-Blackness. And it's really unfortunate.
Indeed it is, brother. How did you feel? And I already know everybody was blowing you up. When I first saw the clip, I was like, has Pastor Kristian seen this yet? Philip Anthony Mitchell, pastor at 2819 Church, speaking on respecting authority. And from seeing that from my own personal stance, I'm like, bro, this sounds like slave talk. Like, how do you blame a victim for being murdered or being mishandled in that moment and saying it's because we don't respect authority? But it's like if Black people didn't respect quote unquote authority, that's what we've had to do all life. Or our people in the 40s and the 30s, to your point, couldn't even stare in a white woman's eyes. They had to put their head down, or they had to get off the sidewalk. Emmett Till, he had a stutter and he would whistle so he could get through sentences, and he was killed for that. So us respecting authority, if that wasn't true, then we wouldn't even be here right now standing. But also we do fight back as well. So how did you feel from hearing that and from seeing that as well?
Yeah, so I just dropped a whole podcast episode about this.
Holy smokes. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's something I'm very passionate about. I think it's important. I also just did an interview with Ebony Jasmine Harris on her new podcast. I'm going to say something controversial. So we talked about this topic of the Black church as a plantation.
Yep.
Right. And I was just bringing some of my insight to that conversation. And I think it's important for us to understand our own history. That's why books about our history are being banned.
Yeah.
Because when we know our history, we act accordingly. We understand where we come from, what we've overcome, what we've had to deal with, how we encountered certain ideas as a people. Like, it starts to make more sense how we got to where we are.
Yeah.
So when I talk about this like slave-like theology, my friend Stephen Thurston calls it slavey theology. The theology that we were given on the plantation. And that theology was reinforced on the plantation by plantation preachers who were hired, enlisted by Massa. So Massa put them in place to preach to the other slaves what the Bible says about how you need to obey your masters. Slaves, be obedient to your masters. And if you suffer long enough here, your reward is in heaven. That is why really early on in gospel music, our music was obsessed with heaven. We sang about heaven all the time, right? It's baked into the theology. So that is where a lot of us were introduced to Christianity, on the plantation preacher telling us to slaves, obey your master, or no matter what happens, submit to the governing authorities. That is the message that Philip Anthony Mitchell preached to his church on Palm Sunday. He preached the same message to his church, his flock of hundreds of thousands of Black people. He told them what the plantation preacher used to tell the slaves on the plantation to keep them obedient to master so that they could make master's money and then go to heaven when they die. At what point do we commit as a people to break that cycle? When do we make that commitment? Because you don't have to abandon Jesus to break that cycle. And I know that a lot of people have like completely walked away from the faith, and I don't blame you. I help people walk away from the faith. I don't even personally identify as a Christian right now. I'm very, very much connected to the way of Jesus, though. And I feel like that's different from what Christianity has become. But like, regardless of whether we're going to ascribe to the name of Jesus, Christianity or not, how do we break that cycle of thinking that we're only supposed to live well in heaven? When do we get to live well here? When is that our message? And that's the problem.
Wow. Why is it so hard for Christians now, especially Black Christians, to truly understand that Jesus was a revolutionary? That's why he was put on the cross, and not this person who was docile, going with the flow, quote unquote, respecting authority. Why is that so hard for Black Christians to truly understand?
Well, a lot of Black Christians don't read the Bible. Yeah. Most church folk are going off of what their pastor told them about the Bible, or these days, what their favorite influencers are telling them about the Bible. So most people aren't actually reading the Bible, number one. Wow. Because if you just like stop and read Jesus's ministry, like just read Jesus's story, and you see the stuff that he reinforces and emphasizes throughout his story, it starts to make sense. He's a little bit different from the way fundamentalism has packaged him, right? But we don't really understand the Bible. We are given our doctrine before we ever read the Bible for ourselves. Wow. Our doctrine is established. And we are taught as Christians before we ever read the Bible that the Bible is beyond question. Yeah. It's beyond critique. So that shapes how you read it when you actually read it, if you do. So a lot of people have gotten their idea of Christianity through a doctrine that was created by a particular community with a particular agenda. So yeah, it's really hard to engage the fact that Jesus was a revolutionary when you just thought Jesus was all about purity and holiness. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You know, whatever your version of personal piety is, you don't smoke, drink, cuss, and you don't have sex, and you're not gay or queer in any way, and you go to church on Sunday and you pray. So that makes you a good person. Like, that's so shallow.
Yeah, indeed. Christian influencers, what are your thoughts on that group of people right now? Is that somewhat dangerous to have people that's spewing certain types of rhetoric and there might not be facts behind it, or, you know, they're telling you to pull up at this church on Sunday? How do you feel just about that space right now of Christian influencing?
I hate it. I hate it so much. Yeah. And I hate even the fact that, like, you know, I'm included in that. You know what I'm saying?
And they try to throw you in there?
Oh, God. Because, you know, people draw their own conclusions about me. And I can't control that. I'm too far out there. Yeah. So, you know, some people refer to me as a Christian. Some people don't. Some people think I'm a bully. Some people think I'm a defender from bullies. It just all of this stuff happens when you get out here in this whole influencer space that I never really wanted to get into. But I don't like it because like Christian influencers are like the new televangelists. Wow. You know, when you think about it, like that's where we spend most of our time now. Like growing up, TV was where we spent most of our time. That was our mass media. Yeah. We would watch movies, shows, news, music videos, everything.
Sports, everything you needed was there. Yeah, you're right.
Now we do all of that on our phone.
Wow.
So the people who are getting your attention on your phone have the most influence. And I'm going to tell you the worst part about Christian influencer culture. Too many people are building or forming their faith off of sound bites. You cannot form your faith on theological sound bites. You can't do it. You can't do it. I don't care how many 60-second reels you watch. You are going to have to go deeper at some point, or you're just going to run into a brick wall. Wow. Like I talk to people all the time. You know, we have a digital community in Patreon where we do a lot of that work. Like we have classes and we have a community of people where we ask questions and exchange resources, and I do live streams and we do that type of stuff where like I answer questions and we work through stuff together. And there's always somebody like, you know, every few weeks who says something like, I'm so glad I finally joined because I've learned so much since I got here. Like I've grown so much. Somebody joined our community and said, I have grown more here in 6 months of community with y'all than I did in my prior 10 years of deconstructing in isolation. Because there is something to being in conversation with people. There's something to the exchange of ideas, rather than what we're accustomed to in church is having a preacher talk at us. So we really like have to decentralize some of the exchange of communication that we have, because everything traditionally has come from the top down, the preacher to the pew, the pulpit to the pew. And what we try to do in our space is decentralize that. And we just sitting together at a table and all having a conversation together. That allows people to engage their faith in more meaningful ways than the influencer hitting you with a 60-second reel or, you know, just showing a sermon. It's like, let's have a conversation. You know, let's ask the tough questions. Ask the tough questions and let's be real about it.
Yes, sir. On socials, to your point, I see people posting, especially here in Atlanta, I'm going to this mega church, that church, parking lot's full, people are packed. Do you feel like people are showing up for the brand or showing up truly for God? How do you feel about this current era right now?
I think there's a little bit of both. I think brand goes a long way. And people flock to what's popular. That's just the thing. It's like, oh, that's the hottest thing going on. Well, I need to go over here and see what all the hype is about. So that's just normal. And I don't knock it. I mean, my background is in marketing and business development. So I don't knock branding. Like the platform that we have. I had to put marketing expertise into that. I had to put branding expertise into that. But yeah, like I think the problem is we are too impressed with the spectacle of it all. And we don't interrogate the substance. That's the problem. So we listen to what people say on the surface, and we're drawn in by the amazing music and all of the hype and the passion. And then we miss what lies underneath, what grounds all of this, what's the ultimate agenda. in the earth. What's the ultimate agenda in the earth? Because, you know, a lot of times in church say the agenda is heaven, but heaven can take care of itself. Talk to me about how we living right here.
Come on, Pastor. What dangers potentially could these young folks face by being in these mega churches now? Because I would say like my age group of like late 20s was that group that started to walk away from the church and, you know, try to learn like different things, concepts. But now these babies are young because of those influencers, to your point of showing up now at the big churches, things like that. What type of disappointments could they face? Just dangers overall from being in those type of environments.
I got a whole community of people who can tell you about what type of dangers and concerns they should have. There's a saying that my friend Autumn, we call her Rich Auntie, she started it on the podcast. She says, "Such was I." That's her statement, because we're always talking about the impacts of indoctrination on how we move throughout the world, how we suppress ourselves, how we interact with people based on that indoctrination. So we're always having these conversations, and she'll always say, "I have grace because such was I." She'll always say, like, "I'm glad that I wasn't in that place in my life when social media is what it is, because I would have been one of these people out here crashing out, talking about everything is demonic and don't go see sinners, because there's
people saying don't go see sinners, right? Wow.
You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Like, so you live with a lot of regret when you give up yourself like that, because whenever you come back to yourself, you're gonna ask yourself, what the hell was I doing? What did I do with all of that time where I could have been living my life on my own terms? Sure, with the guidance of a spiritual community, with the guidance of a pastor, but still on my own terms, so that I have the autonomy and the agency to even disagree with my pastor or my faith community if I should decide. But in these, like, you know, fundamentalist spaces, you don't get the space to disagree with the pastor or the faith leader, because they are the voice of God.
Wow.
That's how they brand themselves, as the voice of God. I'm just telling you what God said. And then that takes away your autonomy and your agency. So yeah, regret is the thing that I think people will deal with the most.
Autonomy, agency. What does living life to its fullest potential, but also being a Christian, a believer, look like in 2025?
So my whole ministry is built on the theological foundation of the greatest commandment, right? When I went to seminary and had all of these holes poked in my embedded theology, all of these things that I believe were true, only to discover, like, oh, it's actually not like that. You know, I went through all of that. I think it was Mark Twain that said, "It's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And I went through that in seminary and started thinking about, like, okay, I thought I knew a bunch of stuff that I really don't know. And now I'm, you know, coming into a deeper understanding. So what does that look like in practical terms as it applies to how I live out my faith? And I knew I could not continue to practice the basic components of the theology that I was given. And I started, you know, looking in the Bible, because I was a seminary student. I was like, is there anything else in here redemptive? Like, can I redeem, you know, the spirituality that I've built over these past 20 something years of my life? And I landed on the greatest commandment in Matthew chapter 22, where an attorney asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment in all of the law? And Jesus said, love God with your heart, soul, mind, and your strength. And the second part is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Then he says, everything in the law and everything in the prophets hinges on these two. So love God with your heart, soul, mind, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself come as a package deal. Everything hinges on those two. And as I started to really unpack that, because I was like, okay, if we supposed to be like Jesus and we supposed to follow his way, he's saying this is the most important thing. This is what he said. He said, love God. And the second part is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. That is a package deal. One is not more important than the other. Love God is not more important than love your neighbor as yourself. Because that word like, the second part is like it. That word in the original language of the New Testament, it means of equal rank. So he's saying love God, and of equal rank, love your neighbor as yourself. So you can't love God if you don't love your neighbor. And you can't love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. And when I realized that love your neighbor as yourself, the as yourself part was the part that we never talked about growing up. Nope. Nobody ever said it's important for you to love yourself. God wants you to love yourself. That's the greatest commandment in the faith. You can't live for God if you don't love yourself. Nobody ever told me that. So when I saw that sitting there staring me in the face, I was like, well, then I need to start really digging into what it means for me to love myself. And that's what I help people do. And that's what I think it means to live an abundant life in 2025 and still honor your moral compass and what you believe about God and what you believe about the world, is that you learn how to love yourself. It was the great Howard Thurman that said, don't ask yourself, what does the world need? But ask yourself, what makes you come alive?